Well, with all of the rising anti-Semitism, then a movement arose. And that movement, you might call it the Zionist movement. The Zionist movement was the desire of Jews around the world to finally do something, to move back and to have a homeland in Israel, Zion, the Mount Zion, where the city of David and the Temple Mount was. That's the hope. And so Jews started to hold on to this hope. And in fact, it also started to catch hold when the Zionist Congress was formed. A German Jew named Theodor Herzl wrote a publication called Der Judenstaat, the Jewish state, declaring the idea that Israel could have a homeland once again. And so they made a Zionist Congress, and Jews could be part of this Congress, and they could have a vote if they contributed a shekel, and they could have representation, and things started to happen, and people started to move back. Although they didn't own it, they didn't have it, who controlled it? Now this is important. In the late 1800s, early 1900s, when this Zionist movement started to take shape, who had control over that land? This is a very important point to remember. Who had control over that land? The Turks. The Ottomans, the Ottoman Empire, controlled that land. Not the Arabs. The Turks are not Arabs. They're Turks. And though they're Muslim. Not the Arabs, not the Jews. And this, nevertheless, they started to move and make aliyah. That's the Jewish word for moving back and setting up your life again in the land. Aliyah. And so all of that came to an abrupt end in 1917 at the end of World War I. At the end of World War I, it resulted in Britain, the British Empire, defeating the Ottomans. And so they now, the British, control the area formerly controlled by the Ottomans in that area. And so in that day, they went to the League of Nations, which was an organization before the United Nations. There was the League of Nations. Interestingly, the United States was not part of it. But they went to the League of Nations asking for authority or a mandate to control the area. And they were granted that authority, which became known as the British Mandate, sometimes just referred to as the Mandate. So when you read your history and you read news and you hear about the British Mandate or the Mandate, that's what we're talking about. After World War I, the British defeated the Ottomans, the Turks, and the British Mandate was born. They went to the United States, got approval also from them to maintain this authority. So then the Jews started coming in waves to move back to the land and set up a kibbutz. Many of you have heard of what a kibbutz is. The plural form is kibbutzim. And so they had these little communities that they would build up out of the dirt. Sometimes they would find a swamp, and you can buy a swamp very cheap. And so they would buy the swamp from the Arabs, and then they would set up a kibbutz. And then maybe a group from Romania might come, and then they would buy an area and set up a kibbutz. Maybe a group from Lithuania would come and set up a kibbutz. And so on, more tens of thousands started to come. And then the Arabs started to get very concerned. So the Arab revolts began, and they became very bloody, very tragic.